Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of That Was Okay, I Guess, a podcast about mediocre and or forgotten movies. My guest today is not really a guest. He was a former guest, but now he is going to be my co-host, Brendan Murphy, longtime friend. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing wonderful. It is fantastic to be here and to be your new co-host. I look forward to watching many forgettable movies and reminiscing about them.
Well, that's the entire point of this, so I'm happy you are on board for more than one reason, really. Chief among them being that I think we kind of have the same sort of mentality when it comes to these cheap throwaway movies that nobody ever really cared about that much.
Definitely.
And certainly don't anymore. So this should be a fun partnership, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Garbage bin movies, $5 DVDs on the way out of Walmart. Stick your hand in the pile. Let's see what comes up. I like it.
Honestly, that was how I determined what movies to watch when I was in high school. If it was for like $5 or less and I had heard of it, I would just buy it. I no longer have most of those DVDs. At a certain point, there was some clutter there, and I Marie Kondo'd them out of there.
That's okay. That's okay. When everything's going digital now, so I wonder what the garbage bin equivalent will be.
I think it's those like open directories you see on Google sometimes, just like, oh, that's free. That's cheaper than $5.
Yeah, it's the whole movie's on Netflix and nobody's taking it down.
So speaking of Netflix, I think that's how we both watched this one, because this was like right at the end of the like DVD peak era. You know, streaming was kind of coming in. People weren't really buying DVDs the same way they bought videotapes or even the early days of DVDs. And this movie is Law Abiding Citizen. This was a fun kind of crime thriller. I don't know if it was meant to be fun. It seemed like it was supposed to be a little more hardcore and intense and twisted than a lot of the others. But what did you think of the movie overall?
I am genuinely conflicted on it. On the one hand, I did find it incredibly entertaining in fits and spurts. I think the first half of the movie is far stronger than the second half of the movie because it operates more effectively as like a holy shit, I can't believe they just did that. Let's have them in a room together, chewing the scenery together because these are two very competent actors and I'm on board with this, versus the moral gray area of the second half of the movie where both of our leads are separated and it has to rely very heavily on the script and whatever morals that the movie's trying to play around with, and it doesn't play with them well. And I had no idea what point this movie was trying to make about the criminal justice system, about law and order, about eye for an eye. Gerard Butler mentions at one point that it's gonna get biblical, and I think that just about sums it up.
Yeah, and I'm happy you brought up the moral part of this because I had a couple questions about that also. It's definitely in that sort of post 9/11 sort of thing where it's like you just want revenge on every single bad guy you find, and even though Gerard Butler's character really takes the definition of bad guy to take revenge on a little bit loosely, and that's where the plot of the movie really comes in.
Yeah.
But you're definitely still supposed to sympathize with him, even though he's just killing like a random lawyer.
Yeah, and that's something that irked the hell out of me because I literally just finished watching it, as you know. So I'm still trying to wrap around how this movie intended to turn this like sympathetic dad, because he is sympathetic at least until he like takes a buzzsaw and like just like mutilates the guy who murdered his wife and daughter.
There is a Hostel-esque torture scene, like about 40 minutes into it.
I'm like, how did they turn, or how did they intend to turn this guy, this bumbling like engineer or whatever, into this Jigsaw-esque like terrorist who is shutting down the streets of Philadelphia over the course of 90 minutes? I don't know. I don't think the movie did it quite successfully because there felt, at least to me, I felt like there was a point right there in the middle of the movie after he shanks buff Post Malone in the neck a few times with his steak, the bone from his steak, that it wanted us to turn into the like thriller territory. This is the mastermind. Every move is orchestrated. The whole thing is choreographed to the dotted I's and crossed T's. And I just felt like they kept introducing things, because like right after he shanked the guy in the neck, they start going into Clyde's backstory. Yeah. And I'm like, does he need a backstory? Like, I thought we already had the backstory. His wife and child were murdered. Like, that was the sympathy. Now he's this orchestrator of death. Like this drone master, what did Doug Stamper say happened to him? He took this one terrorist's necktie and made it choke him to death or something.
Yeah, something like that, and I do want to get back to that later, but let's start with the top of the plot here as we just kind of recap the entire movie.
Sorry, I'm all over the place because I, again, just watched it. All these questions. We should start at the beginning.
There is kind of a lot going on here, which is interesting. So at the beginning of the movie, we have Gerard Butler, who is just a normal family man, wife and daughter, and in a home invasion, his wife and daughter are murdered by two people who break in. This is the first time that I thought maybe the movie could have been a little more dark comedic, because there were kind of the dark comedy elements in there, like in that opening sequence when Gerard Butler opens the door all nonchalant and then gets whapped in the head with a baseball bat coming in from off screen. Yeah. Like that had the same beat to it as like the burn after reading scene where you just see Brad Pitt's dopey face and then he gets shot. It was basically the same thing.
Yeah. Speaking, I just watched that movie the other day. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's a good one. This
reminded me of. And by the way, as to your criticism there, like saying that within the first minute of the film it could have been better, but it reminded me of another movie that came out around that time with Mel Gibson, Edge of Darkness.
Yeah.
But this movie isn't as effective, I think. Where in the opening to Edge of Darkness, Mel Gibson is like chilling with his daughter who like just showed up. She's apparently in trouble with somebody. And the door swings open and she gets like mafia shotgunned right in the chest and like thrown across the room because of the force of this blast. And Mel Gibson is just like, there's a visual symmetry between the way Mel Gibson is like his rage in that scene and shock versus like how she gets shot. Yeah. And it's so explicit and explosive and out of nowhere. Oh my God. And with this one, like, I think I agree with you. Like, if this could have been a little bit more darkly comedic, or at least, I don't know, less like comic, like it could have been either more comical or less comical.
Yeah, it had all the beats of being a dark comedy. It just wasn't supposed to be, which is why I felt almost bad about laughing at parts, but it was set up like a joke. And that's not necessarily a criticism. I think that there's like something going on visually there, and I think that Gary Gray is a good enough director to know how his things are coming off on screen. It's just that, you know, it almost tried to play it both ways for most of it, and it started with the very first minute of the movie, which really set me up for something that never ended up paying off.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There are moments in this movie where it's got that kind of action hero quippiness, where it's very much trying to get you like sympathetic toward Gerard Butler, like he's a man with a mission who's like going against the establishment that oppressed him, sort of. Where you've got lines like "fuck you and your pommes frites" in this movie, or him telling a sitting judge, "I bet you take it up the ass." Like it has these comic elements where it's trying to throw some levity in there to try and endear us to this character. Darkly comic situations, like he's standing trial for murdering people, for cutting him up, for cutting a man, like filleting this man with a hacksaw and cutting his eyelids open and taking his penis off with a box cutter. Like this is seriously grotesque stuff. So grotesque.
Point out too that even in that torture sequence, which we're skipping just a little bit ahead, but I think you can kind of tell what happened between now and there. You know, one of the criminals walks free. Gerard Butler decides to go after him and everybody else that was even involved in letting the criminal walk free. So that's the criminal that he ends up torturing in a scene that describes everything in graphic detail but doesn't show you any of it, which is a total difference from just about every other movie of this era. You know, Saw had already had 4 sequels. Both Hostels had come out. Audiences, especially R-rated audiences, were used to seeing an incredible level of violence, especially towards people that were in no way sympathetic. There is definitely one unambiguously terrible person in this, and that's the criminal that he tortures to death and dismembers.
Darby, I think his name was.
Yes, that's right. And yeah, you don't really see any of it. Eventually you see like an arm scattered off as the detectives find his body. But this is an especially non-graphic movie for the most part. It's all about really the action and the interplay between these two characters, which really makes it stand out in one way. It's just really unexpected that, oh, okay, so they're not going to show this? Okay.
Yeah. Speaking of Hostel, could you imagine if Eli Roth directed this movie? Like, there would have been...
Would be fun.
Yeah, or Tarantino. There would have been like, well, if Tarantino directed it, it would be good. But it's there would be geysers of like blood everywhere. That mirror that he set up over Darby with like his wife and child's photograph up there with them, like blood would have been squirting 10 feet off the ground up to that. You know.
Yeah.
The movie does show restraint. You know. I kind of got swept up when I was watching it, just to disagree with you slightly. Like the grotesqueness of it, I think came more from like the type of moral that this movie was kind of presenting here. That whole eye for an eye at all costs thing. Like,
yeah.
And I think that's what I mean when I say something like this movie was grotesque, because you are right. Like the physical violence, aside from the neck shanking scene.
Yeah, that was pretty bloody.
Yeah, but even then, it's not like it's just dull thuds and a lot of like blood spraying everywhere. It's not there's not much in the way of viscera. It's just visceral. So yeah, no, I think I agree with you there regarding that. This movie could have been a little bit more graphic, catered to that audience, at least a little bit, where you got this mastermind in a cage and Silence of the Lambs style, where Hannibal Lecter like goes in detail about how he eats people.
Yeah.
You know, and that eliciting more of a chill down your spine than actually watching someone get his foot taken off with a bone saw.
Yeah, which we don't really watch. We see the saw and we see the foot, and then it's nothing. It's not like the Psycho shower scene where it's very selective editing and you don't ever really see. It's just he puts the saw to the guy's leg and it cuts away, and then later you see an arm. But you did bring up the moral grotesquerie of it. There's some gray area in, you know, the tortured killing of an obviously awful person. And I think that there is trying to, the movie is trying to draw some sort of comparison between that and capital punishment, because we did just see his conspirator be executed in painful style, but the symbolism between the two is clear. But then after this, Gerard Butler decides he's going to go after the other people who were involved in letting that first criminal go free, which seems like it was stopped because Gerard Butler killed him. That probably should have been the end of it. But no, he wants more revenge. So he goes to jail and somehow starts killing people from there.
Yeah, he doesn't just want revenge for his wife and daughter. It's the object of his frustration is the entire criminal justice system. And it's blurry, at least to me, what exactly his problem or the movie's problem with the criminal justice system is.
Yeah.
Does justice work too slowly? Is it neglectful? Is it prejudicial? The movie to me seemed to say in broad strokes that the criminal justice system at the moment, as far as this guy is concerned, Clyde, it's just wrong. Like whatever the criminal justice system is doing, it's wrong. And he wants to kill them all for it.
There's not really a criticism of the system in here. It's just that he is pissed off that it allowed one guy to go free after a few years, while the other one, who clearly did not deserve execution, given that he had nothing to do with the murders, just the break-in. That guy was the one who was executed, and yet that never really ever comes back up again, which makes it seem like there's just kind of sort of messiness around what actual criticisms there might be of the justice system. And I think with a little sharper writing, I wasn't a big fan of the screenplay on this one.
Oh, absolutely. Really could have been
absolutely. A good criticism of it that would have made this just a much better movie.
Yeah, this script seemed to lack focus. Mm-hmm. And I put it this way in my notes, that this is a great script for like a freshman law student who is just being introduced to these concepts and knows like the markation, like the demarcations for like case files or whatever. Because the scene where Gerard Butler's in the court talking to the judge and he's, disputing whether or not he should post bail or something like that. Mm-hmm. He's like listing off these case files and stuff like that. The script, like, it has some elements that help the story, that help the movie as an experience, not necessarily the story. Mm-hmm. Because I think that it's fuzzy, unfocused on its morals, on what it thinks of like law enforcement, like knowing where this movie goes. In regards to like a police state, stuff like that. Yeah. Don't know what it's trying to say there, but the script, at least for me, worked in portraying extremely egotistical characters.
Yes.
Driven solely by self-interest, because regardless of what Gerard Butler's Clyde says in this movie, like everything he's doing is in service of the self. Mm-hmm. Like he wants this revenge, this vengeance, like everything he's doing is based on his interpretation of right and wrong. And Jamie Foxx's Nick, he's doing the exact same thing, just on the side of law enforcement. So I think it works there. So like if you got ego-driven characters, I think the best person who could write that, like, I know better than you, freshman law student. I think that's how I would classify this script.
Yeah, it's just... It's shaky, but let's move on with the plot. So Butler's in jail. He's confessed to one crime or something along those lines. It's kind of hard to tell exactly what happens in a lot of the legal things, but he ends up in jail because Jamie Foxx knows that he is responsible. And in there, he makes demands for more confessions, kind of a deal sort of thing. And at one point, he asks for a steak dinner with which he uses to murder his cellmate. Yeah, he takes the bone out of the steak.
Del Frisco's.
Yeah.
I hear they cater, he says.
This is, incidentally, I think this is my favorite Gerard Butler performance I've ever seen. It's not as if the bar is super high there. He's not in many good movies, but he's really chewing some scenery in this one.
His movie after this, I think, was that one with Katherine Heigl, where he's like the love coach who has like a show or something like that. Truth. Yeah, it's this really awful rom-com. So yeah, it's all been downhill for him here. Like I remember seeing him in Coriolanus, or what I think that's how you pronounce it, the Shakespeare adaptation, which was meh. But yeah, like in this movie, he's actually really good. Mm-hmm. And that's surprising. Like, I don't know if it's because so many other aspects of the film are kind of like iffy, but if there's one thing I think worked really well in this movie, it was the interplay between Jamie Foxx and Gerard Butler. Regardless of the material, they were both, in my opinion, on point this whole film. Like, they sold these lines like, I bet you take it up the ass. Or Gerard Butler in the cellmate he wound up murdering. If you remember, like at first he asked for a bed in exchange for a full confession. And Buff Post Malone asks him like, hey, nice bed. And he goes, yeah, it's a single. And I'm like, that's funny. That's kind of funny. Like, there's some good lines here. There's some good dialogue here. And the direction is really good too, because there's so much forward momentum in the beginning of the movie. Like the editing and the direction are actually really good. Shots are composed well. Yeah. When Jamie Foxx and Gerard Butler are doing their little interrogation scenes, you can see like two egos like wrestling with one another. I mean, I think that's effective. It's just like, why?
Yeah, and the thing that like I think really broke it for me is that the moves didn't necessarily all add up. Like, I'm sure that they could have. There's a twist at the end, which we'll get to, that seemed like the characters probably could have figured that out a lot earlier than they did, and just never even considered it.
Mm-hmm.
But after he shanks his roommate in multiple body parts, he gets sent to solitary confinement, where it turns out not only has he already killed the lawyer of the guy that murdered his wife and daughter, but he has also targeted multiple other people around the city. Some of the lawyers that Jamie Foxx worked with.
Yeah, and then the judge that oversaw the trial.
The judge death. Okay, we do have to talk about this one.
It was so bizarre.
She answers a cell phone, and then all of a sudden the cell phone shoots her. It explodes.
Yeah, I
couldn't tell.
It's like, I mean, I know at the end of the movie, and who gives a shit about spoilers, I guess, but at the end of the movie, it turns out he's been like sneaking out through a tunnel or whatever into this property that he owned. And I think that's what you were talking about. Like, why the fuck didn't you check his business expenses before you put him in jail?
Or just go to the solitary confinement cell, because clearly he's doing something and you know this.
It's like, hey, there's like, it's like someone carved around the sink there. That's peculiar. Let's put him in this single specific solitary confinement cell. The scene with the judge, I wrote it down. Hold on. There's a line that she says that I just thought was absolutely ridiculous. Where, and this goes back into what we were saying about what is this movie saying about criminal justice? Like, where is the criticism being targeted? Is it even criticizing the criminal justice system? Because the judge sits there and she's like, okay, so Nick and old guy, the DA or whatever, you guys want me to relax some laws, bend some things around, like pay off somebody or something, like get this stuff around so we can investigate Clyde further or something like that, or limit his access to something or other. She's like, you want me to bend the rules to help like limit his God-given rights? And they both kind of slowly nod, and she's like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And then they're like, oh, you will? And she's like, well, that's the good, or she answers the phone and they're like, hey, you gonna take that? Because earlier in the movie, she was criticizing Jamie Foxx for using a phone, which is like the only reason that that scene would be there, is to justify the one later.
Irony, don't you get it?
Oh, it's not only a freshman law student, a freshman film student. Yeah. A man of multiple disciplines.
Yeah. And this is really the only one that is somewhat realistic too. You know, in others, it's like, okay, bombs in their cars that went off when
in the gas tank, like and then when he drove through, there was an IR sensor or some shit that activated the bomb through the gas tank. And it's like, okay, fine, whatever, cars go boom, that's whatever. But like the judge's cell phone, like, didn't she have to make a call like earlier in the day or something? Is this the first time she's answering her phone? Like,
I don't think that you can make somebody else's cell phone blow up. I think you have to.
I mean, was it a Samsung?
In it? Yeah.
Is that too old a reference now? That was like 2 years ago.
So yeah, this is like the one that just doesn't work for me. It's one thing where in The Dark Knight, when there's the exploding cell phone that came out earlier, it's like, well, clearly, you know, the Joker had access to the cell phone and he made that blow up. In this one, we don't really ever connect the dots with how Gerard Butler was ever able to get that cell phone in the first place. This is the one where it's like, oh, he's some sort of ghost.
This is before we have the revelation that he's even sneaking in and out of the prison. I mean, and it's in The Dark Knight. I mean, first off, I mean, not even in the same league, those two films, but it's like, it's already been established from the jump in The Dark Knight that your villain has contingency after contingency after contingency. It's set up in the first like bank heist that he's going to be the guy who gets out in every situation. And in this movie, it starts off as, oh, that guy's family died. And it's like, now he's blowing off judges' heads in an hour and a half. I just don't know. And I think at that point in the movie, we were only about like an hour and change, maybe, into the movie. So, and this is only like the third time we're seeing the judge, and she's throwing around like really cringeworthy lines of like, oh, well, that's the thing about being the judge. I can do whatever I want. Like, as she's answering her phone, that's her exact line. It's like, that's the thing about being the judge. I can do whatever I want. And it's like, oh, subtle.
Yeah. Yeah, so finally, one more criticism of the legal system there.
Right.
So, yeah, there are two plot twists. They're not huge revelations or anything, but they are two big-ish twists. The second one that we've brought up a few times is that he had a system of tunnels that got him in and out of the prison to a cache of weapons and technology that he had. The only reason he had that, though, was because of the first little plot twist where Jamie Foxx and his boss meet with a CIA contact who tells them that Gerard Butler used to work with the agency and was able to create a whole bunch of different imaginative and creative ways to kill the CIA targets that should have been impossible. And this is a twist that I think only justifies the existence of him having all these weapons and technology, because it is 100% clear the movie has already established that he can kill people in creative ways that are unexpected. So I don't know why we needed the CIA twist at all for one scene, other than the fact that they had Michael Kelly available and could get him to do this scene.
And yeah, all props to Michael Kelly. Like, if you're going to show up for 5 seconds and you got to talk real serious with a beanie on and a trench coat in a tunnel in the middle of Philly in the middle of the night, he's your guy.
Yep.
But he's the perfect, like, forgettable face, blend into the crowd espionage guy. It worked in House of Cards. It works here.
Yep.
But this, more to your point, this like explanation, it felt like this marriage of how do we one up these deaths from before? How do we up quote unquote up the stakes? Oh, well, just throw some guns and rocket launchers and shit. Like, he says this is going to get biblical, and apparently biblical means remote controlled rocket launchers. So
yeah, didn't you read the New Testament?
Yeah, it's the book of John. It's right there. It's in the Gospels, or is it Psalms? Anyways, but that's not New Testament. But yeah, it's this need to kind of one up his like tacticianship, I suppose, for lack of a better word, while also not having any idea of how to explain his ability to do these things. It's like it feels so retroactive. It honestly feels like whoever, what was the name of the guy who wrote this? I think I wrote it down. It doesn't fucking matter.
Kurt Wimmer wrote this.
Yeah, and he also wrote the fucking Point Break reboot. Like, good for him. It shows your craftsmanship, sir. But it just felt so, like I said, retroactive. Like, hey, we have him do these awesome things. Like, well, how do we explain this? And part of me feels like the movie didn't need to.
Yeah, it didn't need to at all.
Yeah,
like it's been established. You know, we don't need to get a backstory for everything, and that was a trend at the time too that I really disliked. It led to such terrible ideas as Hannibal Rising. You just don't need backstory for everything. If you establish something about a character and the audience is along with it, we don't necessarily need to know why. And when it comes with something like this that just really grinds the movie to a halt for a few minutes, doesn't add anything other than Michael Kelly, it's not great.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I wrote in my notes, like, while I was watching this. Like, this movie just skids to a halt. Like, right, like, you've got all this tension and momentum building once he gets into solitary confinement. So the movie decides that this is the time to take a breath, lose all of that forward momentum, which was masking every issue with the plot up to that point. Yeah. Because you're like, oh my God, what's this guy going to do next? But it's so frustrating because it's like, I don't give a shit. Like, if he used to build like self-suffocating neckties, that's Bond villain bullshit. Get that out of here. Yeah. We're talking about the issues of negligent criminal justice in Philadelphia. Like, what is with this Dr. No garbage? Like, is he Clyde from upstate, or is he Blowfield? Like, I don't understand. It was enough for me, just like you said, it had been established prior to this scene. It was enough for me to know that he was what was her name? She the actress who played the wife in Talladega Nights. She played Sarah in this movie. Yeah. where they're doing a walk and talk type deal through the courthouse, and she's saying like he used to be a tinkerer. He had a whole, like, he was working with the government to help do experimental weapons or something. He has patents and this and that. That's how he's got his money. That's how he got this. I was like, just 3 lines of dialogue. That's all I needed. That was perfect. Thank you. I understand. What more motivation do you need than he's really fucking smart? Mm-hmm. We saw that because he was looking through a magnifying glass at the beginning of the movie. Yeah. He's really smart. He's got cash. It's been 10 years. He's had plenty of time to plan everything out. It felt so redundant. And it's like, I mean, I guess if you want to push your movie over 100-minute runtime, it works. And obviously, if you've got Michael Kelly, for God's sakes, use him.
Speaking of, if you get this person, for God's sakes, use them. And I think you know where I'm going with this.
Sure.
Then we meet the mayor for the first time, played by Viola Davis.
I was so happy.
Yeah. Honestly, the movie does nothing with her.
No.
Which seems like a real waste of talent. It's Viola Davis. This is like in there just so there can be like, okay, here's our third act, but it's not really a third act. It doesn't really raise the stakes or ramp anything up that Gerard Butler's next target is City Hall and the mayor, because this hasn't been established yet, so we have no idea what it means other than it's the mayor, and it just stagnates after this. And really the movie peaks with the scene that was in all the trailers and TV spots where Jamie Foxx just beats Gerard Butler up outside the prison for a couple minutes,
which is very bad.
Yeah,
very bad.
After this, the movie just really just doesn't go anywhere that it wasn't already.
Yeah, it's you got to think about everything that like happened in the third act and how dull it all felt. I mean, Viola Davis shows up, and like again, people that who are huge now, like Regina Hall played Jamie Foxx's wife.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, it's her.
Yeah, also getting
Girls' Night.
Nothing to do.
Yeah, she like, why don't you go into his recital, you bastard husband of mine? And it's like, there's a murderer. It's like the writing room. The writing room after this film was made is full of fridged women. But you've got Viola Davis shows up to give the DA and Jamie Foxx like a stern talking to, which no one can do it better. They go to the funeral, the DA dies, and then automatically they're back, and like Jamie Foxx is back with her, the mayor, and she's like, "I told you to fix this," and it's like he just left, and now he's back. Like he was gone for a day. Like I don't understand. Like, what are you trying to say here, movie? Like the criminal justice system and the government don't have enough power to deal with terrorists? Because I've seen movies that are better than this that tackle that subject with a fair bit more nuance. But he becomes the acting DA. Gets like the line she uses, "Get me a Bible." Like I'm like, okay,
it gets biblical.
Yeah, right. That theme throughout the third act there, but. Everything like crammed into the last literal 15 minutes of this movie. You discover his business expenses. Like everybody else dies. You discover his business expenses. You discover the garage that he's been using to sneak in and out of prison. You find his stockpile. Jamie Foxx and the cop with curly hair like go through the place and figure everything out. They discover a bomb threat. There's the scene of Gerard Butler doing his best Bane impression by like walking in to the area as the janitor and like, "Hey, what happened to your eye?" Just a lawyer beat me up. No big deal. But and he's walking in through there. You've got that sort of interesting scene that like the scene is 30 seconds long where they find the bomb. The one cop is like, "Oh my God, we need to warn the mayor," and Jamie Foxx is like, "No, that's bad. He'll know." And then the very next scene is Gerard Butler coming back. I think it's close following is Gerard Butler getting back into his cell, but Jamie Foxx is already there and he's got a gun. And you're like, "Mr. Fox, please, like, what are you trying to say here? Like, you can't take justice into your own hands." And there's that bewildering like dialogue between the two of them where he's like, "I don't make deals with murderers anymore," and Gerard Butler's like, "I taught you well." And it's like, what? what's the point of this? Like, so he's going to take justice into his own hands. So Gerard Butler sets off the bomb, but oh no, Jamie Foxx put it under his pillow. And there's this admittedly wonderfully shot scene where the fire is like slowly climbing up the walls and he's holding the little bracelet that says daddy on it. And then all of a sudden the movie wants to be about like a father losing his family again. And I'm like, do I celebrate this? Am I sad by this? As Jamie Foxx is walking slow motion out of the place with the explosion in the background, I'm like, okay. All of that happened in like 12 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes at the very end of the movie.
Yeah, no, there really just isn't a third act. It's just the second going for longer. And they really finish off that movie, Gerard Butler holding his daughter's daddy bracelet, and then it cuts immediately to Jamie Foxx at his daughter's recital because he's finally able to go. And they're really trying to build a theme out of that. But I don't think... there definitely isn't enough to connect the two, that's for sure. And even with Jamie Foxx's character being built up, it just doesn't work because there wasn't really anything to it beforehand. There was nothing new.
There was one scene, There's one scene. There's one scene earlier in the movie during the lethal injection scene where you get the curtains open for the recital, and then that's juxtaposed with the curtains opening with Ames or whatever, the accomplice for Darby, in like Christ pose being set up with all the tubes and stuff running out of him, and Jamie Foxx and Leslie Bibb and all of those guys are watching. But I didn't know what it was trying to say there, other than Jamie Foxx is choosing his occupation over his family life. And then at the end, I guess maybe it's suggesting the opposite, where it's like, good job. But like you said, the moral of the movie, the lesson that is to be learned, because Jamie Foxx's character is the only one that seems to learn anything, sort of. The film's suggesting that he does. It's like the lesson that we're being like, that's being shoved in our face while confusing. It definitely isn't choose your family over the law. Because Gerard Butler, the whole movie, does the exact opposite. He becomes judge, jury, and executioner.
And he definitely wants people like Jamie Foxx to spend more time doing their jobs. That seems to be the entire point of his diatribe, right? Exactly.
Like at the end of the movie, like some of that would make sense, at least the imagery, because it's mostly silent that last couple of bits of the movie. So the imagery would make sense if Gerard Butler's like journey led him to a moment where he's like, hold your family close, Nick. All of this is garbage or something. And it's like, okay, all right, I can that's terrible and tropey, but I mean, I get it. But this, it's like, no, I'm still in control. And then he hits the call button and then burns himself alive. And it's like, huh? So, and then Jamie Foxx is like, okay, I'm done with that. And it's like, well, thankfully, so are we.
That sums it up, really. And I want to go back to something you said before we move on to some more interesting stuff. But you mentioned how a lot of the women in this are mostly fridged. And even when they aren't, in the case of Jamie Foxx's wife and daughter, there really isn't anything going on there. The only women whose roles kind of have a point in this are Gerard Butler's wife and daughter, who are the most fridged of all. The impetus
explicitly fridged.
Yeah,
the first to be fridged.
Reason for his being. But Jamie Foxx's wife and daughter don't really do anything except try to force this theme in there that does not connect whatsoever. The judge exists to die. The mayor exists to be threatened. And even the one friend that Jamie Foxx has at his law firm, the girl Sarah, played by Leslie Bibb, the one who's supposed to be nice and all that, and that should be a turning point for him when she dies, but it just doesn't affect anything.
Yeah,
so
it galvanizes
fridged, but
him.
The fridge is unplugged, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's rotting corpses falling out because the latch doesn't work. But it's like, you're absolutely right. It doesn't affect him. I mean, he's sad about it, but if anything, it galvanizes him in his quest for revenge against Gerard Butler. Because not long after that is when he's beating the shit out of him outside the penitentiary. You know, it's like he doubles down, and that's just so, I don't know. That's kind of bizarre. It's like, this is the result of all this bloodshed and everything like that. But there's no character moment there. The only thing that happens is that the sort of lover that Sarah has that you never see in the film, Chester. I think he's mentioned a handful of times. He sends over some stuff that Sarah was working on, and that's how they catch the guy. And he says, "Thanks, Sarah," to her memory, her ethereal being. And
so she could have just
that's it.
not died and sent it herself.
She could have still
the movie
been
would
there.
Not have been changed.
Exactly. She could have still been alive. It's like, why? Like, you can't think of a better use than to just kill her off. Like, I do like what you said about Viola Davis, where she's the stand-in for I guess like a police state. She's like, I don't care. She has a monologue where she's talking about at a round table where she's talking about how they need to break through all the red tape in order to get law and order. Like, we need a quote a show of force. And it's like, is that good? Is that inherently good? Like, what's the point this movie's trying to make here? Is that good? I don't know. I don't want to get on that. We're talking about women in film, and I don't want to get on that. But that's pervasive. The thought that keeps coming into my head, like, what the fuck is this movie trying to say? Like, morally, ethically. Like, I don't.
Yeah, it is a mess thematically. But let's talk about Gary Gray for a moment here. So because he's got an interesting career, and I think he is.
It's gotten better.
Good at his job. Yeah. So his career starts very off-brand. He directs Friday, which is a really funny movie. And then he does a few in a row, actually a bunch in a row that are just totally forgettable, but a few are in this style. Set It Off is a crime action thriller. The Negotiator is one of the most similar movies to this that I could possibly think of. In fact, they're basically the same thing, just 10 years apart and slightly different plots. Thematically, they're exactly
pre and post 9/11.
Yes, exactly. A Man Apart is another vigilante action movie, so similar things. Then he decides, okay, I'm just going to do a regular cool action movie, directs The Italian Job.
Which is, that's an okay movie. I'm fine with that. Like,
it was a hit.
Like Mark Wahlberg punching Ed Norton in the face, though I wish it was the opposite, scenario there. It's not bad. It's effective. It boosted the sales of Mini Coopers in the US like tenfold, if I remember correctly. It was a great action movie. It was goofy, but competent, beyond competent.
Yeah, and so after that, he gets a little bit more into mainstream Hollywood, does another genre piece, but very different. It's called Be Cool, It Flops. It's a sequel to a movie that did really well, ramps up the budget, gets a couple new, bigger stars into there, and just does not do well critically, financially. It's a bomb. So this is his comeback 4 years later from Be Cool. And this works. I mean, it's not a good movie, but it makes money. It finishes second at the box office opening weekend, so never a number one. But in a busy October weekend, this does well. And after that, he parlays the success of this into a couple big hits in a row. Straight Outta Compton and The Fate of the Furious, which, did you know this, is one of the top 10 grossing movies ever.
I did know that. Straight Outta Compton was a better movie.
So I've heard. I have not seen either of those. And he's going to be coming back sometime this year, I think this summer, with the new Men in Black with Tessa Thompson and Chris Hemsworth. So Gary Gray, after this, just kept shooting upward, definitely getting better as a director, but also I think getting savvier in terms of Hollywood. Yeah. And it all started because he essentially rewrote one of his old movies that did well. The Negotiator did not do well. It was just a better movie. And just figures out how to make it more marketable. And ever since then, it's just been marketing the shit out of his movies and getting so much financial success out of it.
Oh, it's
all
definitely
because of Law-Abiding Citizen.
I would argue that it probably is because of Law-Abiding Citizen. He's throughout the 2010s, he's been like skyrocketing. Like, I mean, just like you said, one of the top 10 grossing films, Fate of the Furious. I couldn't tell you which one of the movies that is because I haven't seen anything after the greatest movie of all time, Tokyo Drift. But God, I hope you know I'm joking. But is that the one where is that what's his face's last one?
Fate? Yeah,
the one where Paul Walker and Vin Diesel like separate at the end, and you had that Wiz Khalifa song that.
No, Paul Walker is not in this one. It's the first one without him.
Oh, whatever. So
yeah.
Yeah, good for F. Gary Gray. Like that's really freaking good for him. But I mean that right there could probably be the result of marketing. Like you get like the first installment, a highly anticipated installment. You've shown that you're a capable action director. Standards for the Furious franchise or the Fast franchise. What do they call it?
Oh god, I don't know. I've just been calling them Fast and Furious.
Yeah, and now you've got like Dwayne Johnson's doing this Hobbs and Shaw garbage. God, I can't wait till he's not popular anymore. Sorry, but
he's going to be president. Haven't you heard?
Oh God, please God no. But I'll take the Starbucks CEO over Dwayne Johnson. You can edit that out if you want, if that gets you in trouble. But it's like you get it like a role directing a part of an established franchise where standards are despicably low, and it's almost like printing money, but you do it well enough that people like it more than the other entries, so it makes even more money, especially in China. And that's nothing but good. And Straight Outta Compton, and I know you said you haven't seen it, but that's a really effective movie. It's got a lot of it glosses over some of the subject matter that I personally felt would have been more pertinent to the individual members of NWA, but like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
But regarding Law Abiding Citizen, at no point in this movie did I ever think that the direction was an issue. Like the way that, like I mentioned earlier, the sense of forward momentum, like you're talking logistics within the movie, like where people are standing. Are they like, never once did I feel like, oh, that guy missed his mark, or, oh, the timing on this is really weird, or, oh, this actor isn't necessarily committed. I felt like everything was working. Like, I'll put it this way. I felt that there was a vision behind this movie. Someone had an idea of how they wanted it to look, sound, how they wanted everything to play out. Not necessarily the script, because I felt like, again, I say that everything there looked retroactive, but as far as the storyboarding process is going, as far as the way shots are composed, as far as everything else aside from the writing of this movie, I think that it's pretty competent. It's pretty good. There are some scenes in this movie where I'm just like, oh, like the depth of field just changed. Like that's a nice touch. Like there are just some scenes here that I think are pretty good. Even those more visceral scenes that we felt could have either not been there or gone much further, I think they were handled well enough. Not like I saw this movie in theaters. I'll be 100% honest with you. I saw this movie in theaters, but I remembered absolutely nothing about it. I remembered that someone got shanked with a T-bone. And
it's pretty hard to forget that.
Yeah, I mean, how old were we in 2009? Like,
yeah, I was 15.
Like, yeah, it was like
perfect age to watch this.
Yeah, like I think I was 16. You go in with like parental supervision or whatever, and you watch your parents like, oh my god, and then you're just like, yeah, blood and guts. I just watched Saw last week. But yeah, that's the only thing I remembered about this movie. And watching it now, I don't want to say that I'm picking up on more nuance. I'm more identifying the lack of nuance in the writing.
Yeah.
But as far as like scenes are composed, as far as everything's going, like I felt that someone knew what they wanted when they were making this film. And the only thing lacking is just a clear sense of why everything was happening. And I pin that specifically on Kurt Wimmer, whatever the heck his name was.
Kurt Wimmer.
Yeah, there we go. I pin that more on him than I do the direction. I feel like everything looked good.
Yeah, and so this was shot by Jonathan Sella, who also did a couple recent action movies that look great. The first John Wick and Atomic Blonde. So
yeah,
he knows what he's doing.
The decision to shoot particular scenes, you really get the sense that this is taking place in a cold, bitter winter in Philadelphia. Like the decision to use like stock footage, like aerial stock footage here and establishing shots here. And hey, let's wait a second and shoot this while it's snowing. Like as what's his face is escaping over the rooftops. Like I can't imagine that was a coincidence, knowing how orchestrated movies are. Like,
yeah,
I feel like the decision making behind the way this movie was put together was very competent.
Yeah. It's definitely from people who are really figuring out how to make certain things effective. And I want to compare this to The Negotiator a little bit more. Again, I don't know if you've seen that one.
No, I absolutely have not.
Yes. So it is essentially a similar character in Samuel L. Jackson in The Negotiator to Gerard Butler. They don't have the same impetus. Samuel L. Jackson's family is not murdered in The Negotiator. He is simply fed up with the justice system and breaks bad, puts a lot of people in targets, etc. The plot is essentially the same, only it's confined to one office instead of widespreading. So, but thematically, very, very similar. And also, that movie did not do well at the box office.
Yeah.
So the marketing had to be different, because I don't think it was just the pre and post 9/11 thing that really informed the audience for each of these movies. I think that it definitely had something to do with the thematic differences. And I think that where The Negotiator promised tension and all that, Law Abiding Citizen promised anger. And I think, not to get too sociologist or SJW about this, I think that people are a lot more tolerant of, or at least mainstream movie audiences, of white male anger. At least in 2009, maybe Bruce Willis's Death Wish absolutely bombing proves that is no longer the case. But I think that that's something that people are interested in, or at least they understand. Whereas movies like The Negotiator or John Q, where there's some like righteous anger from marginalized citizens, it doesn't necessarily have the same pull to, let's say, mainstream movie audiences. And it's not just the racial aspect, but it is that anger that was promised in 2009 that I think people were still feeling, especially in the first year after Obama was elected. That there was some other stuff going on there that this really tapped into, and I think the marketing as a result is the biggest reason why this movie ended up pulling in 126 million worldwide.
Especially for an R-rated movie back in 2009, that's not bad.
Yeah.
That's really not bad. But like, I think you're right. I don't think you have to worry about like saying anything is getting too SJW. Like just the other year we had to watch like pundits all over the place. Like in a world where Ben Shapiro has a microphone in front of his face like every second of every day. Yeah, it's like, oh my God. But the people, decrying that Moonlight won Best Picture. It
was amazing.
Yeah, we're talking about, like, just earlier, it's like we're willing to believe Keanu Reeves will kill every last human being alive in New York City, all 17 million of them, because his dog died. But like one black guy trying to figure out like where his place in the world is in a very subtle and more down to earth way, like subdued anger and all of the subversions that exist, visual and otherwise, in that movie. And it's like, but people are crying foul over that. And I know John Wick and Moonlight aren't in any way analogous to one another, but
other than both being good movies, I like both of them a lot.
Oh yes, exactly. But one made significantly more money than the other, I'm sure. One's a franchise, but it's
Moonlight too.
Yeah,
I can only imagine.
As far as appropriating the spotlight for male anger in a film, it's something that, like you said, like the white angry dad, like fighting for family against any particular force. That is a tale as old as time, as far as Hollywood is concerned. And yeah, this is a very lengthy way for me to say that I completely, wholeheartedly agree with you.
Oh, well, thank you.
But I don't think that the problems are particularly gone just yet.
Yeah, I think definitely we're seeing a lot of audience shifts in terms of movie going right now in many different ways. I think demographics are a big one, but not the only one. But that still does leave me with the question that I always like to ask on this podcast is, how does this movie change if it's being pitched for 2019 instead of 2009? I don't know whether you'd switch the lead actors or not to try to make more of a point, now that in 2019, one big difference is that you can have like explicit discussions of racism as a major theme in movies like this and have it be a big financial success. So I don't know if you switch Fox and Butler's roles. I don't know if you do something just a little bit different in terms of narrowing down the themes of the justice system itself instead of upping the body count as much as possible. But I think there's a couple more ways that you make this more of the times if you make it now.
One thing, I don't think Gerard Butler would be cast in it at all. Like you can still cast Jamie Foxx in movies.
Yeah.
I just remember thinking
that.
Did you not
watch Geostorm?
Hey, come on! I watched Gods of Egypt, and that was enough. But Geostorm, it's just I can't. No, we're not going to talk about that. But yeah, it's one thing I was thinking like the whole time I'm watching this. I'm like, what the fuck happened to Gerard Butler? Like he's still jacked after 300. Like he has to have a scene where he's like completely nude or whatever in this movie, and that's fine. But he had a confidence about him in this movie that I haven't seen in any movie of his since then. But Jamie Foxx, not only does he not look a day older, I think the last movie I saw him in was Baby Driver. But not only does he not look a day older than 10 years ago, but he still has all of the there's a word for this, but he's got all that charm and charisma. Yeah. He's got a leading man build, and I'm sorry, but he can just deliver. Like the first name that comes to mind when someone's talking about a leading man normally isn't Jamie Foxx. I think nowadays everybody's talking about whoever's playing the next big superhero, or like Dwayne fucking Johnson. But like Jamie Foxx is an unbelievably competent actor. Like he's really good. Yeah. And he's pretty good in this movie. Even when he's saying "fuck your pommes frites," I'm like, yeah, fuck his pommes frites.
Yeah.
Like he's really good.
I think he kind of has the unfortunate and undeserved reputation of being a guy who kind of didn't deserve that Oscar, or at least that people forget about. The same way Nicolas Cage is, but like Jamie Foxx doesn't have like a long list of awful movies. He's been funny. He's been good. I mean, he made at the start of this decade, he made Horrible Bosses and Django Unchained back to back. I know he wasn't in Horrible Bosses
Motherfucker
for long,
Jones,
but he was my favorite part of that movie by a lot.
Absolutely. His story about like how he got the nickname Motherfucker Jones, and just watching Jason Bateman's like Wonder Bread middle class idiot like squirming at the table, like that is enlightened comedy in my opinion.
It's a good movie. He does good performances in just about everything, and even when he's in some bad movies, normally the better part of it, if nothing else, like he has never ever made a movie worse, even when the movie's not great, or maybe if he's not the best fit for a part. I never really think to myself like, oh, if that was just this other actor instead, it would have been better. Yeah,
exactly. So I think nowadays in 2019 you could still cast Jamie Foxx, he'd still be great. I don't know who you would cast opposite him. I don't know who you would use to replace Gerard Butler. Chris Pratt, who cares? Like,
you'd have to be older, I think. It has to be somebody of a certain age, I think. Like Jamie Foxx could still do it. Butler, he's too old, and he doesn't quite have that verve that he used to. I don't think he's going to be. Who knows? Liam Neeson. Like, even clearly
despite
somebody with no problem killing random people. Oh
I mean, let's not.
Yeah. Next week we'll be talking about Cold Justice, starring Liam Neeson.
We're gonna follow up on what's going on with Virginia Governor Ralph Northam.
Yeah.
And it's like, fuck.
I've never been a fucking week.
We can save that for after we talk about the movie.
So let's wrap up this podcast.
Sure.
So what happened to make this movie so forgotten? You have a director who's becoming a superstar. You have Jamie Foxx, who has a lot of fans, still pretty big, and a lot of people watched or knew this movie. It was enough of a hit to be considered watched, and people knew it at the time. It was advertised just about everywhere. But 10 years later, this is not a thing that anybody talks about, even with regard to Gary Gray's back career. What happened to make this movie so forgettable, besides the obvious cliches, I guess?
The movie was tropey. You had quite a few scenes where someone's like, or like Gerard Butler says at one point, like, oh, I just hacked into this or whatever and got access. And it's like, all right.
Yeah.
But I honestly think it's the movie is really good, and at least in the first couple of minutes, like maybe the first 30 minutes, it's really good at asking questions, but it offers absolutely no answers to those questions. And it also at times doesn't really seem to care to. It kind of falls into thriller territory there at the end, where, especially in a movie that came out 1 year after The Dark Knight,
yeah,
where you have a villain, a mastermind villain, like terrorizing a whole town, I'm sorry, a whole city. Yeah. And you've got like the police bearing down, like assuming control over the daily lives of its, citizens. This movie didn't justify any of that, didn't offer any justification for any of that. It just kind of, if the second half of the movie was as enthralling as the first half, maybe it would be remembered. But it's like it had this really interesting premise, and using this kind of shock and awe, oh my God, what's happening? Ooh, another mastermind thriller, jettison up to the peak of the as high as the movie gets at like maybe 50 minutes in, and then it just slowly crashes and burns. If this movie was as consistent in its opening salvo as it was, if the movie was as consistent throughout the whole thing as it was in its opening salvo, I think maybe people would have remembered this more. Just like a sense of consistency, a better, more ambiguous, more enigmatic villain. I don't think there was payoff. If really, like that last scene is so anticlimactic.
Yeah.
If this had been focused, again, like I think the only reason this movie was forgotten was because of the craftsmanship behind making the movie. It's a testament to how good writing saves a bad movie, and how bad writing can tank a well-assembled movie.
So I have a theory. I'll say one thing that I think for sure. I think the lack of, for lack of a better term, a money shot here kind of kills it. There's no memorable scene.
Yeah.
And the thing that they put in all the trailers was Jamie Foxx punching Gerard Butler in that open field next to the prison, which sure looks nice. It was well shot and everything, but that's not something that anybody's going to remember. And you obviously don't need, something like, the UFO exploding the White House, the ultimate money shot. But you need something that people are going to latch onto, like, oh, that part from Law Abiding Citizen where there's not really any of that. It's fine as is. If it had been a better movie, I think people might remember it a little more, but that's definitely a strike on the negative side for this one. My other theory that I think might be right, but again, just a theory, I think this was supposed to be Gerard Butler's star turn. He was known to rom-com fans before, but that doesn't necessarily make you a breakout star. And 300, I don't think he ever really got that much of a boost from that specifically, at least in terms of moviegoers. I didn't even know who the star of 300 was until the year after
that was
came out.
300 was way better for Zack Snyder than it was for anyone who starred in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this was supposed to be his star turn, and when his next couple things bombed, and when this didn't do that many favors to Gerard Butler during the course of the movie, I think that just kind of ruined what was supposed to be his next big step as into like a high-level A-lister instead of just a movie star.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's true. That's just a theory that I'm coming up with on the fly, off the cuff, because
I like both of those theories, especially your first one there, where there's no singular moment in this film for anybody to latch on to. Like, there's no cerebral, like, look at every single one of Christopher Nolan's films. There's like, even if they're kind of whatever, or they're hard to follow, like say Inception, like in Inception, you remember the turning hallway. In The Dark Knight, you remember the semi truck getting upended, or maybe just the entirety of the film, because it's good.
Yeah, there's a lot. Like Dark Knight is just that over and over and over again.
Yeah, there's always one scene. Like in Dunkirk, there's the scene there at the end where all of the different timelines come together, and they're trying to. Maybe you can, like, okay, here, I think that this movie, Law Abiding Citizen, didn't work because Hans Zimmer didn't do the score.
There you go. Sure.
If you had some wubs, some like blaring horns and brass, I think maybe people would have remembered this film a little more. Maybe it would have ramped up the tension there at the end, or if, I don't know, maybe if City Hall did blow up. Who knows?
Yeah.
I agree with you though. There's no money shot.
It needed something. Like, nobody's going into YouTube's like movie clips and finding anything from Law Abiding Citizen, you know, and I think that hurts it, because there's plenty of bad movies that have, you know, at least something, if not interesting, that people will want to look at and see for about a minute and a half.
It's actually a good idea. Like I just typed in Law Abiding Citizen into YouTube.
Did you get
yeah, I've got the trailer. I can rent the movie for $2. Lovely. Yeah. There's Law Abiding Citizen legendary scene based off the thumbnail. It looks like when he's punching him in the face.
So it's the one in like outside the prison and that little.
Yeah, it's the exact. You've got that low angled shot there, right underneath Gerard Butler, looking up at Jamie Foxx before he punches him in the face. There's the questioning scene where he's asking for a bed.
Yeah, geez.
And then there's the.
I don't know about that one.
Yeah, I don't either. And then there's Clyde's a born tactician, so it's the Michael Kelly scene. Yeah, and that's it. Those are the only ones. Each one has a little over 1 million views, and every other one has like 17,000 views. So there's no like explosive like scene related to the action of the movie, related to what the characters do. There's just like elaborations on the promotional material.
Yeah, I think it just needed a little more style. I think it's really just kind of, it's not bland because it keeps moving and keeps going, and bland movies don't hold my interest this long.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of style to it, and for a director who is pretty stylish for the most part, especially. I have a feeling that Men in Black International is going to be a little bit more stylish and fun than Barry Sonnenfeld's versions, who is also a fun, stylish director, for the record.
Oh,
but,
true.
Yeah, just needed a little bit more oomph, I guess.
Yeah, it needed some. The camera itself needed to be a character.
So, final question before we wrap up, and I think I know your answer to this because you said you have already seen it. Would you watch Law Abiding Citizen again?
Maybe with somebody if they wanted to watch it. This is one of those movies where I'll classify it this way. If nothing else is on and this just happens to be on like TNT, censored fully, like throughout, like 20 minutes of the movie missing, cut for language and explicit imagery, I'd flip back and forth between this and maybe, you know, the NFL Network or something. Something like that. I would keep it in the corner while I'm like flipping through channels.
Yeah. So I think I'm a no on this one. I think there's enough movies I like that do similar things for me to just wish I was watching one of those instead. And since The Negotiator exists and is better, I could always just turn on The Negotiator instead. So it's a no for me. I like that you're at a maybe, especially having seen it twice now.
I think I'm more at a I don't mind it. But as for whether or not it should stay forgotten or be remembered, like just forget it.
Yeah. Just watch The Negotiator instead. That's advice to everybody out there who's kind of deciding on whether or not to watch Law Abiding Citizen. The Negotiator's out there. It's better. And Samuel L. Jackson is better than Gerard Butler, just a little bit better of an actor, I think. So yeah, I recommend that one. Don't recommend Law Abiding Citizen. I barely remembered it until you suggested it, and I'm happy you did.
Right, I saw it and I was like, I remember that one. I told you, like when we were messaging each other, like I had totally forgotten that this movie existed. And when I saw Gerard Butler's face opposite Jamie Foxx's, I was like, This fits the mantra of the podcast, like straight up. I had completely forgotten about this.
It's a good poster, I think. If it's someone with more A-list pull than Gerard Butler, I think this goes down as like a great poster of the OOs, because it's just like you get everything you need to know about the movie from the poster. It's really good.
Yeah, no, I think. In today's like oversaturated like hero pose posters, I'm appreciative of the fact that like posters are getting a bit more colorful nowadays. Like that post 9/11 like angsty, like stern browed, glaring at the camera, like that there was an appeal to that. There was a charm to that. It was more indicative of the theme of the movie than today, where it's like, hey, look who's in this.
Yeah, and like a lot of the like blockbuster posters just look like that statue the Miami Marlins used to have in center field, that garish nightmare thing. No, the Infinity War poster reminded me of that specifically.
No, exactly.
All right, so I think that's going to wrap up this podcast. I'm happy that we could do this. We're going to be pushing these out more regularly from now on. So be sure to subscribe at iTunes or SoundCloud or YouTube, however you like to listen to your podcast. Murph, any final words?
Forget this movie, and thank you for tuning in. I would like to thank my mother and father for supporting me in all of my endeavors, and Tucker for taking me in off the street when I didn't have any food or bedding and caring for me. And yeah, thanks.
I gave Murph a single bed and a T-bone steak. We'll be back next week with another mediocre movie. This is That Was Okay, I Guess.